by being intentional and putting these blocks of deep work in place, it's proactive, it's not reactive. And so I'm identifying every week what are the most impactful things to really move my business forward and to really improve the lives of my clients. And doing those things. And I've just noticed less mental noise about, oh, but you need to be thinking about this and you need to be doing that. It's just like, okay, I have a system and these things are moving.
Welcome to the Money Skills for Therapists podcast, where we answer this question: how can therapists and health practitioners go from money shame and confusion to feeling calm and confident about their finances and get money really working for them in both their private practice and their lives? I'm your host, Linzy Bonham, therapist turned money coach and creator of the course Money Skills for Therapists. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. So today's podcast episode is with David Frank. David is a returning guest. He is a financial planner for therapists specifically. And today, David and I talk about deep work. What deep work is. It might be something you've heard about. We dig into what it is, our own definitions of it. We talk about the value of making time to give yourself focus and be able to really dig in to do deep work. We talk about how deep work applies to private practice, what it means financially for private practice, and about our own experiences in our businesses and in our lives with using deep work practices to create space to focus on what really matters to us. I talk about my recent love affair with digital minimalism, uncoupling with my phone. This is a really fun conversation for me to have, to just nerd out about a topic that I've been really excited about lately, which is deep work and digital minimalism, and just really being intentional with how we use our times in our business and in our lives. Here's my conversation with David Frank. Hi, David. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. And I'm very excited for what we're planning to talk about today. But before we get into our planned topic, tell folks again who are listening a little bit about yourself, because this is your second time on the podcast. But yeah, remind us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, great. Happy to do it. So my name is David Frank, and I am the founder and owner of Turning Point Financial. And we are a financial planning firm that focuses exclusively on serving the needs of therapists who own private practices. So I help folks navigate every essential element of their financial life, from budgeting to investing to risk management, insurance, estate planning, and kind of everything in between.
Great. And our topic for today that we are planning to talk about is something that I knew that you were interested in because you have this excellent autoresponder on your email.
Yes.
Can you tell folks about the autoresponder on your email?
Yeah. So the autoresponder on my email. So I have my out of office set on all the time, even when I'm in the office. And so what happens is that if you send me an email, you'll get, I think, a brief little email that's just like, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. I aim to return client emails within 72 hours. I aim to return everyone else's email within a week. And that probably sounds crazy to you, but let me explain to you why I'm doing that. And the reason I do that is because email is this huge distraction. And by the way, my clients know if anything is really urgent or truly important, they can call me or text me. But if something's urgent, don't send me an email, because I only check email a couple times a day. And the reason I do that is because I want to focus on engaging in deep work, which is super important for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that it enables me to do really impactful work for my clients. And I don't want to get distracted. I want to be super focused on what it is that I'm doing, what it is that I'm learning, and what it is that I'm developing to help the therapists of the world out there.
And when I saw that autoresponder, when we first started corresponding, about 6 months ago, I was like, I like this guy. Because it's so intentional. It's so clear. It's such a clear boundary that you're setting of like, this is my boundary. This is why it's here. And I remember you even have links in there too. I think if you want to read more about deep work and, you have a blog on your website that talks about it more in detail, but it's not like you send like a whole lecture out on your autoresponder, but it's just so clear about owning the parts of your work that you do that are really valuable and not kind of giving into this urgency of email that runs most of us most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, this is not something that I, just showed up knowing to do. This is something that I did in the beginning of 2023. So a little over a year ago as we record this, but like getting my life, like reclaiming my life and moving out of my email inbox is something that, it's a fairly recent development for me.
Yes. Yeah, me too. Okay. So Let's talk a little bit about deep work first for folks who are listening who are not familiar, who are like, what does
Yep.
that mean?
Yeah.
Share your definition of deep work with me.
Yeah. So most of my thinking is influenced by this guy by the name of Cal Newport, who
Mhm.
is an author, and I think he's like a computer scientist
Yeah.
somewhere in the Eastern US. I can't remember where he works, maybe Penn or something. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. He wrote a book called Deep Work a number of years ago, and I heard about it through a business coach, I think, at some point. And the whole idea is that, I mean, there's a lot going on in that book, but the general idea is that deep work is really important, especially the way our economy is evolving and given all the changes that are happening with technology and AI and everything else. And yet it's really rare because we're so distracted by email and a million other things that are clamoring for our attention at all hours of the day. So the idea of deep work, for me anyway, is just to have blocks of time where I very intentionally map out over the course of my day/week, what do I need to focus on? What are the most important activities sort of proactively, like not reacting to stuff that's coming into me, but being really intentional about what is most important for me in terms of accomplishing the big picture goals that I want to accomplish, and then protecting that time where I sit down and I just tune out all distractions, put the phone away, put it somewhere else where I don't even see it light up if something comes in, and I just focused on the task at hand for some period of time. And that can vary. It can be a 25-minute sort of sprint, or it could be sometimes a multi-hour period.
Yeah. And I'm doing Cal Newport's course right now, Life of Focus, which we chatted about a little bit beforehand, where
Yeah.
the first month is about deep work. And so they're just kind of sharing the concepts that are from the book, but giving it to you in this nice implementable way, right? Where you can take action on
Yeah.
it. The
Yeah.
second month is on digital minimalism, which I could talk about for a year. I'm so excited about it. And then the third
Yeah.
part of the course is about doing something meaningful, like having a project that has a lot of meaning, which I think for therapists listening, you already have that. It's your
Right.
clinical work.
Right.
You're doing that work every
Yeah.
day. Right. So I don't think therapists lacked for meaning, but this deep work piece, something that they mentioned in that course as well, which he teaches, it's video recordings. I don't actually get to have contact with Cal Newport. I think I wouldn't know what to say because I'm a little starstruck by him at this point. I'm a bit
Yeah.
of a fangirl, but it's also work that takes focus and skill where you're going to need to be in it for a while, right? So it's not necessarily
Yes.
like these little tasks that like you could train, a 19-year-old to do in half an hour, but it's these tasks that actually like really call on your skills and expertise that you've honed over a long period of time and require you to like kind of like get in the zone, which doesn't mean it's always
Right.
easy to get there. It doesn't mean you start in the
No.
zone, but things that you have to
No.
like sink into and you're like, oh, this was kind of hard, but like now I'm in it. Now I could keep going. Now I'm getting somewhere with this book that I'm writing, this like new lesson that I'm
Right.
creating, this like opt-in, for folks in the online space, this blog article, like those are all
Yep.
things that would be examples of deep work because they require our skills and gifts and they really benefit from a good chunk of time, not like working on something 5 minutes at a time.
Right. Yeah. And he also makes this distinction between deep work and shallow work. And so I think that's kind of can be helpful to think about too. Shallow work is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's, processing just a bunch of different emails that have shown up in your inbox. Shallow work is probably dealing with like invoicing of clients or dealing with insurance billing, whatever it is. That type of stuff where it's not really taxing your mental faculties. It requires some degree of concentration, perhaps, but it's not really very deeply thoughtful work.
Yeah, for private practice owners, it's going to be a lot of your admin work is that shallow work, right? Of
Right.
just like, yeah, checking your inbox, seeing what's there, checking your phone messages, doing your notes. Although I would actually probably argue that notes could be integrated into your deep work, and we'll talk about this in a minute.
Just
Yeah,
thinking about that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think I do think in some ways, though, I will say, I think private practice owners we tend to treat notes as kind of like that later on the side shallow administrative work, but really once you're in flow, they're probably easier. But yeah, so and what they talk about is it's not that these shallow tasks are not important, because I think the word shallow has like negative
Right.
connotations. Like you don't want to be a shallow person.
Yeah.
That's not great.
Right. Right.
You want to be a
Yeah.
deep person. But they're the tasks that don't require that like really accessing all these different parts of your brain at once. And they're also things that once you move into focusing on them, it's hard to get back into those deeper tasks, right? Like they take your attention
Mhm.
away. So if you try to
Yep.
intersperse them every 10 minutes in some deeper task, you're actually they talk about residual attention. You're kind of leaving some of your attention with that task when you stop to check your phone and you send a few texts, and 5 minutes later you go back to work. It takes your brain energy to try to get back on track with whatever you were just
Yeah.
creating. You get out of the flow.
Yeah. And the concept you mentioned about residual attention, I think, is really interesting. I was reviewing some of the notes or my highlights from the book before we jumped on this call. And what I thought was interesting about residual attention specifically is that, and so the concept here, and there's been studies done on this, psychological studies, where the idea is that when you switch from one task to another, you might believe or you attempt to fully direct your attention toward the new task. But despite our best intentions, there's some residual attention that's still going on in our heads that's focused on the old task. So there's like a real cost of switching too frequently. And what I thought was particularly fascinating is that that residual attention, that impact, like it degrades your ability to perform well on the new task. But interestingly, that residual effect is more strongly pronounced when the previous task you were engaged with was shallow work rather than deep work. And I thought that was really intriguing. I think intuitively I might have assumed the opposite would be the case, but
Yeah.
it's just really interesting. And I think that just highlights, at least for me anyway, just the importance of trying to be really intentional and disciplined to the extent possible to sort of batch shallow work and put it almost at the margins of my day if possible, so
Mhm.
that the negative effects of that shallow work aren't creeping into
Yeah.
sort of the middle of my day, or at least the portions of my day where I find I can be the most productive and focused.
Right, like, kind of your best energy and time should go towards
Yep.
that deeper work. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
do really like that idea of residual attention because, like, that to me gives me, like, an image where it's like my attention was here. There's this, like, purple, say my attention's purple. It's like I've got this nice concentration of purple. I go over here to do something quickly, which seems like a little easy side quest, but I leave some of my attention behind. So when I come back, there's a little bit
Yeah.
less of that intensity. There's a little bit less focus left, and the more
Yeah.
that I do that, I'm just, like, kind of, like, spreading that attention thin until when I come back, I don't have a lot left. And I think cognitively, I know what that feels like when I get to that point where I'm like, well,
Mhm.
I'm like, my brain is so full. I can't really sink into this thing anymore because my brain is
Right.
actually thinking about like 12 things right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I think this is a fascinating topic, but like it's difficult. It's not like
Yes.
you can just be like, "Hey, I'm going to be a deep worker now," and I'm like, "Great, I'm totally
Yes.
sold. I'm just going to go do it."
Yes.
I'm even thinking back on today. I've been thinking a lot more about deep work lately because I've been thinking about getting ready to have this conversation with you, and so it's been very top of mind. And yet, there's been times today where like I have gotten distracted by checking the news or checking my email or what have you. It's one of the many areas of life I think where you focus on progress rather than trying to get anything perfect. Progress
Absolutely.
rather than perfection.
Always, always, always. So,
Yeah,
for folks who are listening, you and I, David, do work that's a little bit different than what they do, right? Just because
totally. Yep.
we're not necessarily doing the same amount of like service outward facing every day in the same way that clinicians are. So, thinking about deep work in private practice as someone who works with therapists, how can you see deep work applying to therapists and health practitioners in private practice?
Yeah, I'm biased because, well, like I'm thinking a lot about like the financial world and the financial side, both of being a practice owner and how that translates into your personal financial stuff. And so the first thing that comes to mind to me, one thing that I talk with practice owners about a lot is, especially when you might be newer to private practice, remembering that there are so many tasks that are non-clinical in nature that are really your responsibility, from marketing to kind of like managing the finances of your practice. And there's just going to be a lot of learning that you have to do. And so I think it's really important just to say, okay, when I think about what my ideal caseload looks like, when I think about what my ideal week kind of looks like, and when I think about, when I want to be scheduling client or patient appointments and when I want to be doing the other tasks of the business, just getting really clear, just like keep it in mind and just know, oh yeah, you really have to set aside some significant chunks of time to work on the business and to be learning how to work on the business. So I think, yeah, it's just really important to like know that from the outset, maybe even when you're just thinking about the financial plan for your business in terms of how many folks you can see in any given week. Just keep it in mind. There's so much that needs to be done in addition to just the actual clinical work. So just being actually very proactive and intentional about protecting your time to focus on that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that piece about all those other parts of the business, all the non-client facing parts of the business, sometimes those can feel almost like a little bit of a burden for folks in private practice. It's like,
Yeah.
oh God, and now I have to learn about marketing too. And like now I have to learn
Yeah.
about bookkeeping and find an accountant.
Yep. Yep.
What I do love about bringing some of the deep work concepts to it is it's like, okay, you have learning to do. And learning takes
Yes.
focus, right? And like
Absolutely.
learning, like we really benefit when we can really like dig into something and like come out the other side and be like, now I know this thing that I didn't know 45 minutes ago because I gave myself time just to learn and solve it. And I could see that setting yourself up at the beginning of practice to say, this is my marketing time. And half that time I'm going to be learning some marketing strategies. And then some of that time I'll start actually implementing and building my own website or like really giving those tasks the credit that they're due. And like you are building new neural pathways. Like you are
Yeah.
learning
Yep.
whole new concepts and theories, like to market your practice or to do the finances. Like you're learning things you've truly just never learned before. And learning is a deep work task. It's, it takes a lot of our
Yeah.
cognition. And if you stop and check your phone 15 times or answer a random email that just came in immediately because it just came in, again, you're leaving
Yep.
some of your attention behind. When you go back to learn that thing again, your brain is having to be like, wait, what were we reading? What are we talking
Yep.
about? Oh, yeah, but that
Yeah.
email that I just sent, are they going to reply again? Like, I think that there's such
Yep.
an opportunity there to kind of take that part, the learning part of building those skills seriously.
Yeah. I understand the feeling, like anyone who runs a business, and I put myself in the same bucket, there's just certain things that I'm not super excited about. Like I just don't love it all. But learning how to do those things, it's really important. Like it is a growth activity. And I think, just like another way to think about it is that, it really is an opportunity to sort of like become it's like personal development, right? It's like getting better
Mhm.
at things and learning and
Yes.
just sort of like, I've had to do this myself, just trying to frame things. Like sometimes when I have to learn something new, and we always have to be learning something new. Like that's just the world we live in. Things are constantly changing, especially as business owners. It's like there's new tools, there's new trends, like SEO changes, the way to engage on social media can sometimes change. There's just, I think, protecting time and reframing kind of what it means to be working. Like learning
Mhm.
is such an important part of
Mhm.
actually working,
Mhm.
but it doesn't feel productive a lot of times,
Yes.
it
Yes.
just, and that can be frustrating.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I have noticed myself, like I took this attitude towards learning when I was building out money skills for group practice owners, which is a course that I built out last year from June till December. And Fridays was my deep work day to build that course. So Fridays, depending on where I was kind of in the cycle of like, do I have to do a video drop? Do I have videos due next week? Or do I have a little bit of time? Sometimes I would be making videos and like filming the lesson, making the tool, uploading the lesson,
Right.
editing it, like just in the flow. But
Yeah.
sometimes I would be like, I'm just going to sit and read this book today. And that's going to be
Yeah.
part of it. And it felt
Yeah.
really, I don't know, like respectful of my students for me to be really
Mhm.
just like, I'm just going to, Friday is for this and I'm going to give my all to this. And there's no distractions because my team doesn't work on Fridays. So I'm the only one working. Nobody's going to send me messages. Nobody needs literally anything. I don't
Yeah.
coach on Fridays. But also, it just felt almost like going back to being a student where it's like learning is a valuable activity, right?
Absolutely.
Learning has value. It's not something that I should have to do in the evening on top of my full time work week.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I think that gets back to just kind of like being intentional and creating sort of a sustainable schedule for yourself and
Yes.
not just thinking, I'm going to see 8 clients every day, Monday through Friday, and then I'm going to do everything else sort of nights and weekends.
Hmm.
It's just, there can be seasons where that has to be what happens, right? Like things get out of balance occasionally, but your business, your practice can't be built like that long term. I have conversations with clients like this all the time. The work you're doing is super important. You're helping people. Sometimes you might be helping people in crisis that are actually like relatively high need, and there can be a lot of even like kind of guilt about like not being responsive to their needs. But I think defining boundaries and protecting your own personal time as well as your own deep work time, I mean, it's really just so essential to sort of preventing burnout as opposed to sort of managing burnout once it shows up. Not that it's
Yes.
ever, you can't do this stuff perfectly, right? Like
No.
burnout, it could be a thing that just happens.
Yes.
But just sort of learning and getting better over time, I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, something that I'm quite sure is in Life of Focus, the course, the Cal Newport and Scott H. Young course, that he talks about is the distinction between work that is like cognitively challenging, but is like your zone, like, and therapists, I think about this, like when I was practicing trauma therapy, if I'm in the middle of like an EMDR session and I'm doing parts work with somebody and there's like 12 parts that I'm aware of at any time that I'm kind of listening
Oh,
to and
yeah.
aware of,
Yeah.
right? It's like, that's very much a great example of deep work. And I will be very clear, therapy is deep work. Right? Whether you're
Oh, for
doing talk
sure.
therapy, whether you're doing manual therapy like massage or physio, like you are very much engaged in a deep way, accessing all of these skills and all of this knowledge that you have. It all has to be kind of pulled up and present so that you can assess and intervene and like read the moment and know when to say something and when not to, or when an intervention makes sense and when it doesn't, right? That is very much deep
Mhm.
work. But
Yeah.
there's a distinction between that, deep work, and hard work. And I think what we
Ah,
do in private practice and in business is if you set yourself up for hard work, so it's work that you're doing late into the night, it's work that you're doing on a Saturday morning so that you're not having time with your kids, right? It's like those extra sessions that you're doing at the end of the day when you're already beyond your capacity. That is what causes burnout. I don't
yeah.
actually think that it's often like the actual work that folks are doing that causes the burnout. If it's your zone of genius and you love it, chances are
Right.
it's feeding you. But if you're setting it up so you're
Right.
seeing too many clients, right? Or
Right.
you're working hours that don't work for you, that is what causes burnout. And that's hard work. That's making hard work conditions. It's not actually the
Yeah.
work itself that is
Yeah.
causing the burnout.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And yeah. Oh, I love that.
So another piece that occurred to me as we were talking earlier is I mentioned about notes, right? Like how notes fit
Right.
in.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about it, this has not occurred to me before, but notes are a real pain point for therapists. They hate notes. I hated notes when I was a therapist. I've had my own like notes trauma where, I have 100 notes built up and I'm like, I'm never going to be done typing up these notes. Right. And I have my own handwritten
Yeah.
notes that are kind of like this, like indecipherable, scrawl and random words like dog that like only I know what that means, but then you actually have to type them up and put them into a format that somebody else could understand. And something that I'm thinking about is like, I think that therapists tend to make notes, treat them like shallow work. We treat them like this admin work that is just like taking care of our duty and it's an afterthought. But if we did actually batch our notes at the end of a session when we're still in the flow and that
Yeah.
client is still top of mind and all of those parts of you that were like on board to deliver treatment are still up, I think that that is when notes can become deep work instead of hard work, because we're actually using our kind of full capacity that we've put online for that. Just like type up what you did, finish it off, and then you've kind of like deferred yourself pain for later. This is what's occurring to me because
Yeah.
you do have flow when you're in deep work. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah. No, I really like that. So like a couple thoughts, like so many things kind of jump to mind, but like as you're describing that, I'm almost like, wow, like, does it make sense to almost reframe notes as not just some sort of administrative burden that you have to do, but like an opportunity for you, like to really view it as like, this is part of the service I'm doing to the client, like
Exactly.
the processing of it and like creating something of value. I think that's just really interesting to think about. And oh, by the way, just as like an aside, like therapists aren't like the only ones that don't like notes. Like financial planners also have to compile notes after meetings, right? Like
Yes.
you need to memorialize this stuff
Yes.
like
Yes.
to better serve the clients. And like I've actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to make note taking both efficient and impactful. And I'm definitely not done. I think it's a really actually rich area
Yes.
for development. But
Yeah.
like the other thing that I think about is like, again, the concept of boundaries and balance, because like if you're doing a 50-minute session and you've got back-to-back sessions at the top of every hour, and I know can be so challenging because sometimes I struggle with it too, but boundaries around when the session has to end, right? Because like
Mm,
you protect that 10 minutes of time
yeah.
to like give you time to like do the notes and maybe have a bio break and all these things.
Hmm.
Or maybe, it just doesn't really work for you to have sessions starting at the top of every hour after hour again. And so obviously there's some implications to how you run your practice or run your business that way. And then there's financial implications to these decisions as well. But like, yeah, it's really interesting. And I think Yeah. I always hate to see that happen to people, like when they've
Mhm.
got weeks worth of notes building up, because I know a similar stressor, and it's just
Yes.
like the overhang on your life, and it's
Yes.
not fun at all.
Note pain is a special kind of pain. And I can tell it's a pain because I've seen a few folks in the like therapist coach space offer different supports for note writing. So I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
people are trying to like
Yeah.
offer supports here because it is something that happens so much. But yeah, that boundary piece is so important. And, you know, when I think about the work that therapists and health practitioners do, something that I think about is like if they really valued the work that they were doing, kind of in the way that it sounds like you've developed valuing your own expertise and
Mm,
skills, like where you have that autoresponder where you're like, these are some really important things that I do to like let me do my work well. Therefore,
right.
I'm not going to spend all my time on email. If a therapist can really realize, like, wow, it takes a lot of cognitive and emotional energy to be able to do what I do. Like, it's really like a
Yeah.
flow state that I get into, and I need to be able to like take care of myself and ground between sessions. And if I can do my note at the end of the session, it flows because I know that for myself. It was always true. Like, there's always that little interruption where you're like ending the session with somebody. And for me, I would always like, when I was doing in person sessions, have the person walk over to my desk, you know, do the payment transaction, say like, okay, next Tuesday too is still good. Great. See you then. But if I can just stay at my desk and finish that note, then I've closed it off. But I always gave myself 15-minute breaks between sessions. So it's like if I have a session from 10 till, you know, 11, it's actually only from 10 till 10:50. That last 10 minutes is that a little admin exchange, some time for
Mhm.
notes, and there's a 15-minute buffer before my next session. So my next session is at
Yeah.
11:15. It wouldn't actually be at
Yeah.
11:15 because lunch is sacred, but I'm just using this as an
Right.
example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think part of it is that I was able to recognize like, shit, this is like really crazy work that I do. And it takes so much
Absolutely.
bandwidth. And if you think about your
Yep.
work in a quality over quantity way, and if you can set up your fee to support you in actually doing the
Right.
quantity that you can sustain so you can give the quality that you want, then both you and your client benefit immensely from you really valuing your service.
Well said. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
exactly.
Thank you. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about our own practices of deep work because I know this is something that you've integrated into your work. You were mentioning that today. Sometimes it always doesn't always look exactly how you want to. But tell me about what you've really found works for you in terms of having a deep work practice.
Yeah. So for me, I'm a morning person. So, early to bed, early to rise is just sort of the way that I'm hardwired, and like just like fully accepting that has made life a lot easier. And what I used to do is I sort of wake up, roll over, grab the phone, look at like the New York Times, check the email,
Same,
whatever.
same, same, same.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's just like, oh, but like that's like, but I'm just waking up. Like I'm trying to like ease myself into the day. But I just found like that was reactive, right? That's like I wasn't controlling what was coming into me. So, and I just found like that could put me in a bad mood or a good mood, but it just like it was haphazard, like it was just kind of out of control. And so eventually, what I started doing is like every day when I wake up, and I do a lot on my phone, which maybe isn't the best, but it works for me for right now. I don't do this every morning, but most mornings I'll wake up and the first thing that I read is I just have a list of daily reminders. And they're just like little inspirational quotes that I've picked up. It's not necessarily focused on what tasks I need to accomplish, but it's more kind of mindset and just like reminding myself like the importance of deep work and just like the importance of resilience and just stuff like that. So just like that's the first thing I want entering sort of my psyche for the day, of kind of putting me in a good mind space. And then, I have some coffee, like I get up, but like the first thing I do is just like I don't check email at all. Like I get up, and then the night before I've identified, what is the most what I pick one of the most impactful pieces of deep work that I need to do. And then I usually have like 3 a day or something, like that's a general. And then I pick the one that I least want to do or that I feel the most resistance around. And I try to do that one first. I
Hmm.
don't always do this, but when
Hmm.
I do, I find that it makes my whole day go so much better because it's like I've done the difficult thing. And
That's
what
like
I
the eat
usually
the frog
discover.
strategy, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly right. Eat
No.
the frog. Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. It's just
Yeah.
like I think the idea was like if you eat a frog first thing in the day, like you've already done the worst possible thing. Like
Everything else
everything
is
is
easier.
easy. Right.
Yeah, unless
Everything
you're
is easy
French.
from there.
Christelle, who works for us, is French. She's from France, so she calls it eating the toad because they do eat frogs in France. So
Fair
she eats the
enough.
toad. You
Fair
got to
enough.
eat the toad, do the thing you don't want to do first. Same is true, I think, for folks who ice plunge. I've heard of people who like you do that first thing in the day, and you're like,
Yeah.
everything else after this, easy peasy.
Yeah.
Already did the hard thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But like that's what I try to do. And then after that, so like after I've kind of accomplish that win. And by the way, I usually discover that the task that I wanted to avoid or I found intimidating or whatever, like it actually wasn't that big of a deal. Like usually that's the discovery. And that's empowering as well. It's just kind of like, oh, well, that's good to know. I can do anything now. But then I have very dedicated times where I check email, so like I have my morning sort of deep work session, then I'll like go exercise or take the dog for a walk or do something like that. So like I'm taking care of my physical body as well and giving myself a break, by the way. And then I come back and then it's like, okay, check the email. But I check email. Uh, I say this, some of this is aspirational. I'm so grateful to be having this conversation because I'm reminding myself of like what my intentions
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
And there's
Like,
a
this
little
is a
bit
good
of
plan.
yeah, there's a little bit of deviation in my current reality from what the ideal is, but that just happens, right? Like that's what it means to be human. So, at any rate, at the beginning of the day and right at the end of the day, so that's shallow work, sort of like at the margins of the day, or at least during normal kind of business hours after I've had that morning deep work session. And then the rest, the middle of the day, it can be client meetings, it can be deep work for clients, and of course, it also has to, for me too, has to be deep work around marketing and learning marketing and figuring all that type of stuff out because that's also, it's important, but it can be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And I'm curious, like, what have you found is different for you since you've been implementing these strategies, even if not to perfection, since you have these intentions and you've like created these blocks, what have you noticed has changed for you?
A number of things, but one of the biggest is that my levels of stress and anxiety have gone down because I've developed a practice of yes, doing that eat the frog work. So it's just like I'm building that habit or like the muscle memory almost of doing hard things and just like that internal confidence of just like, yeah, I can do hard things. I do it all the time. But also just by being intentional and putting these blocks of deep work in place, it's proactive, it's not reactive. And so I'm identifying every week what are the most impactful things to really move my business forward, and to really improve the lives of my clients. So I'm doing those things, and there's just like I've just noticed less mental noise about, oh, but you need to be thinking about this and you need to be doing that. It's just like, okay, I have a system and these things
Yes.
are moving. And I think the other thing that I've noticed, and I think this is a pretty universal experience, is that sometimes things take longer. Well, often things take longer than you think they are going to, or maybe they should. But also, I'm discovering that when I look back on the week or the month or the quarter, it's like actually some of this stuff doesn't take as much time and effort as I thought it would to get the results that I want. Like it's really interesting to be like, oh, that was a big scary thing that I had to figure out. It actually wasn't that bad when I just sort of broke
Mm-hmm.
it up into manageable chunks.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's true. That's almost like that thing of like the days are long, but life is short. The individual tasks can take longer than we plan, but if you're actually doing those tasks and like doing the top priority things and getting them done,
Yeah.
the impact that they have can come a lot faster than you might anticipate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's well, yeah. You said it better than I did, but yeah, exactly. The impact. It's like, oh wow, look at these things are actually
Yes.
happening now. Like
Yes. Yes.
that's so cool.
Yes. So I want to share about my practices as well because they're not
Yeah.
as intentional of yours because I have a 5-year-old too. So different
All right.
life
Yeah.
scenario, right? So I
Absolutely.
also am early to bed, early rise because my son thinks that 5 o'clock is a reasonable time to get up in the morning. And some mornings he sleeps until 7, and that's a beautiful gift. But this morning he woke up at maybe today was 5:20. Yesterday 5:08. He decided to wake me up to tell me that I'll never be lost because he'll always be there for me. I was like, that's very sweet. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Can we please
that
go
is
back to
sweet.
sleep? He did not go back to sleep. He didn't go back to sleep at all. That he was up for the day. So I've had to plan my life around that reality, right? Which is like if
Yeah.
I
Yep.
don't go to sleep early, I'm going to be woken up early. Even if my partner does get up with our son, or I set him up with his tablet and he watches like, you know, Netflix for the first little bit, I'm still being woken up early
Mhm.
in the morning. So I
Yeah.
build that in. But what I used to do is exactly what you're describing. I had the exact same routine. New York Times, email. And what I
Mhm.
also did when my email was on my phone, which it's not anymore, is I have 4 different email accounts with Gmail. And I found myself compulsively, I'll just pick up my phone and I'll just flip between all 4 accounts. I check all 4 inboxes within a matter of seconds. There's literally no reason for me to do that because, first of all, our hello at email for hello at Money Nuts and Bolts is not mine. I don't manage it. It's
Uh-huh.
Christelle's. She's in charge of it. So even if I see something there, it's hers to take care of, and she'll let me know if she needs something from me. My
Right.
private practice email is basically inactive. I only get marketing emails or like angry emails from my college when I forget to update my dues soon enough. My personal email, almost nothing happens. And then my
Yeah.
business email, I'm not going to answer if I'm not in work hours anyways. But I
Right.
found that I developed this compulsive almost tick of like, I don't know what to do. Suddenly my phone is like, my phone is in my hand and I'm flipping through my Gmails compulsively. So I used to do that in the morning, even though I've probably never sent an email from bed in my life. And then I would read the New York
Yeah.
Times, which was extremely depressing. I'm not even
Right.
American. I can do nothing about you or anything else in your country. But I developed a real news addiction. And sometimes I'd lie in bed. I have a timer on that, the New York Times and other news apps. Sometimes I might even read the news for like 45 minutes before I got out of bed. And all I'm
Yeah.
doing is delaying starting my day, feeding my body, spending time with my family, taking care of myself. There's this story that it's a break. And
Right.
then I'm like, easing into the day, as you said. That is
Yeah.
definitely not what it was for me. That's not what I was
Right.
actually doing. I think I was
Yeah.
delaying getting up. And I think for me,
Yeah.
it's a remnant from some periods of depression that I went through during COVID and some things that happened in my personal life during COVID. I kind of developed this habit. And like COVID, it wasn't very exciting to get up because like every day's the same.
Right.
What are you going to do? And it was kind of left over. So now, Digital Minimalism, Cal Newport's other book, which I haven't read but is part of his course, I've gotten rid of no news apps on my phone, no Gmail, no Instagram, no Facebook. And sometimes if things notify me, I'm like, oh yeah, you get out of here too. Like my phone is very
Yeah.
boring now. I've made it very, very boring. And that's been extremely helpful for me in terms of deep work, but also just my own mental space, as you say. Like now
Yeah.
that my phone doesn't have anything to give me. I also had a little game I used to play in the evening, this little scavenger hunt game. It was very cute. But like I just wasted time because what I've actually found is setting myself up in the day to have periods of time. So I do deep work on Tuesday mornings and Wednesday mornings. Right? I have a fairly large team at this point. So I have a lot of folks to communicate with, but those are the mornings where like I have deep work time and they're also starting to implement deep work time. Like our new marketing coordinator, I'm like, you're an artist. Please don't feel like you have to
Yeah.
talk to us. Go off and make gorgeous
Right.
things. It feels so good to actually make time to do the important things and get them done. Like it just calms my
Yeah.
whole body to see
Yep.
myself making progress. And it feels in some way too like a coming home to myself where I'm just
Mm.
really being honest with myself about like what does actually make me feel good? What is important to me? Like where do I want to grow as a person and actually nurturing those things rather than this constant reactive relationship with like email and relationship with my phone and relationship with my work. Because something else that I've started saying to my team, which I definitely got from deep work and digital minimalism, is like, we're not an emergency service here, right? If
Right.
we email
Yes.
in the inbox, even for Christelle, it's her inbox. Like so far, we've never gotten an email saying like, "There's an intruder in my house. Please call 911." And this is the address, right? Like
Right.
that's not what we do. We're not a crisis line, right? We're not an emergency
Right.
service, and so
Yep. That's
there's
right.
actually no reason that we all have to have our nervous systems primed for danger by checking our inboxes constantly. That's
Yeah.
not the kind of work that we do, right? And so that has been really helpful for me to like really settle into and like try to help my team settle into it too of like we actually have like much larger purposes to serve and it's so much better for our business for us to be like really sinking in and like building this new course or like finding ways for other folks to find us so they can like take the course or find the podcast. Like that is having
Right.
such a bigger impact in our life than replying to
Yep.
this particular email in 4 hours instead of 20 minutes,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
it
Doesn't make
doesn't
any difference.
make any difference. It doesn't make any difference. So those are some like big things that I have found, but certainly for me implementing like the mix of deep work with like really taking my tasks seriously and taking my own growth seriously and
Mm.
scheduling that the week, combining that with like digital minimalism. And another part of that too, I will say is Cal Newport has this phone foyer concept, which totally brings me back to my own house in the 80s when I was a child. So when I was a child,
Yeah.
the phone was up on the wall. It had a
Mm.
coil, like
Yep.
a phone
Yep.
cord. There was a
I'm with
stool in
you.
front of it, which now lives in my kitchen. I now have that stool. And I remember my mom sitting on the stool, talking on the phone, because that's where the phone lived. Like you go to the phone to use the phone doesn't come with you. And one of the things
Mm.
that has really stuck out to me is this idea of like your phone is not your companion. Like we don't need to
Mm.
carry our phone all over the house. Again, I'm not on call. I'm not a first responder. My brother is a
Yep.
first responder. He does have to do emergency rescue calls. He should have his phone nearby. That's just not
Right.
my life. And I have found leaving my
Right.
phone in one spot in my house has allowed me to actually start just being present in my life.
Yeah.
It's
That's
been
so cool.
transformative for me, especially
Yeah.
along with the deep work practices. Because what it means is if I'm sitting on the couch and I don't know what to do, I can't just look at my phone. I actually have to
Yeah.
decide, what do I actually want to
Yeah.
do? Oh, my
Yeah.
son wants to do tie dye. I had an experience where my son wanted to make tie dye. We had these leftover tie dye packets. He's like, let's make tie dye. And I was like, we don't really have time. And then I was thinking, well, what else are we doing? Because usually what I would say to him is, we don't really have time. You're going to go to bed soon. I would scroll on my phone for a while. He would watch his tablet, and then I get him ready for bed.
Mm.
Instead, because I don't have this crutch of my phone anymore, I was like, sure, let's do tie dye. And turns out tie dye only
Yeah.
takes like 20 minutes. So we did
Yeah.
tie
That's
dye
so
on a weeknight.
interesting.
We had this fun experience together. He was making a mess, but I was just focusing on him so I could just clean up. We made this
Yeah.
cool thing. He was really happy. We had this nice experience. He went to bed. It was like such a better Tuesday evening than I would have had doing the scavenger hunt game on my phone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's so powerful. And like, as I hear us talking, I'm just reminded of the fact, like, this is so like countercultural stuff that we're talking about. Like, this is just, this isn't just folks we know. It's not just therapists, right? Like, this is our whole culture. Like, this
It
is
is.
how everyone just sort of lead, not everyone, but this is the dominant
Yes.
cultural practice of
Yes.
distraction and phone as companion. And yeah, just this automatic habit of I'm bored, or I have like an instant where I don't know what to do next. And so I just open my phone and like let like the lights distract me. I'm just remembering the one thing my partner has recently done is that you can enable the phone. I forget what it's called, but you can turn it into sort of like black and white
Yes.
mode. So
I
it's
do that
just like
too.
less engaging. Okay, do
It's
you? Yeah,
so
interesting.
boring. It looks so
Yeah.
boring.
So
Yeah.
boring. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So thinking then about, what we're talking about, kind of deep work, talking about a little bit of digital minimalism in the mix to like make room to
Yeah.
just be present,
Yeah.
and money. How do you see like deep work intersecting with finances and money and the kind of stuff that we help therapists with?
Yeah. Well, I think that money work is deep work, especially in the beginning. I mean, there's once you get used to it and you get your system set up, there are certain things that can become shallow work, and that's kind of part of the goal. Almost, you want it to be easy to accomplish and engage with. But in the beginning, it is very much deep work because there's so much learning that needs to take place of just familiarizing yourself, even sort of kind of doing like exposure therapy with yourself and some of your money stuff because like emotions do jump up when we touch money, whether it's money in our practices or money in our personal life. And like one thing that I really encourage folks to do, I call them kind of like money dates, which is a term I borrowed from someone, but just having a dedicated time every week. And I think really at least every week, I want to say, like to develop the habit of engaging with your finances in some way, shape, or form. And that really, those money dates are really meant to be kind of exploratory and curiosity driven. So it's not really a time to do your bookkeeping per se, but it's a time to learn different ways to do your bookkeeping or to learn about different software applications that you might consider using for your bookkeeping, just as an example. But there is always so much to be learned in the financial world, and I think it's just important to dedicate time to it and just understand that everyone has to learn this stuff.
Mhm.
Most folks aren't going to be taught it in any type of structured educational setting. So it's really just upon us to kind of figure it out ourselves. And obviously there's folks like you and me that help
Mhm.
people navigate this.
Mhm.
But like we can't really do the work for you.
No,
Like we can help
no.
guide you, but
Yes.
there's always going to be some work that has to be done by yourself.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
just for the nature of it.
Yeah, there's like the learning work, that kind of building new, neural pathways. And then there's also the emotional
Right.
work of dealing with
Yep.
your own emotional landscape as you're doing
Yep.
this work. And I was thinking the exact same thing earlier in our conversation because I did have this little side thought of like, is money work deep work or shallow work? And I completely agree with you. I think that when we start dealing with our finances and we start looking at our money stories and trying to make big financial plans and think about our goals, that is deep work for sure.
Super deep.
That is work that
Yeah.
is going to benefit from you taking like an hour to be with it, to do some reading. And deep work can involve other people. It could be talking with your partner about what do we want, what's important to
Right.
us. Like
Yeah.
what do we want our money to do for us and our family this year? What experiences do we
Yeah.
want to have? What goals? So definitely deep work. But I have the same goal as you, which is that eventually I want there to be shallow work aspects because folks have locked in their systems and they've locked in their
Yep.
goals and they've done
Exactly.
that deeper work. And they're like, oh, I just
Yep.
need to update my spreadsheet, or like, oh, I just need to send my money over to my investments like I do every, 28th
Right.
of the month. And now it's
Right.
just become a little task that you do that might take literally 3 minutes
Yep.
instead of this like deep, like, wait, what does that mean? Whoa, what's happening
Right.
right now? Taking all of that weight out of it is a goal. And then, of course,
Right.
there's always going to be other
Yeah.
things for you to learn about. But
Yep. Yep.
mostly, it should become something that's kind of more automated and doesn't take a lot of energy. And then, then you can use
Right.
your deep work time and energy to learn other things or do other
Yeah,
projects in your
exactly.
life.
Exactly
Mhm.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's well said.
Something else I think about with deep work and money is I would argue that, and this is what Cal Newport does argue in the book, right? Is like folks who take the time to get really good at something, to like value their own learning and become experts in their area, that will have financial returns for you in any kind of
Mm-hmm.
business, in private
Yeah.
practice,
Yep.
in businesses like ours, where we're like helping folks with money in different ways. Like, what I can see is if you are somebody who really takes the time to like value your skills, that's going to allow you to do better therapy, which is going to allow you to charge more per session or get off insurance if that's a goal that you have, right?
Sure.
Or find
Right.
other ways to reach folks, like do deep work to like build out a course, right? So that you can reach 1,000 people with your lessons. If you don't want to do like premium work, reach 1,000 people who pay you like $200 each, right? Like that kind of work
Right.
definitely creates opportunity for like positive financial returns in a business.
Absolutely. And I think like no matter whether you're a therapist or a financial planner or any other profession in this world, it's easy to worry about like what's happening, what's AI going to do, like, or like is our job going to be stolen or what, who knows what's going to happen? Can't predict the future. But what I really believe, and I think Cal Newport argues this in the book too, it's just like if you can get really good at deep work, which is learning how to do new things and get really good at solving complex problems or difficult problems, the nature of your work might evolve as the world evolves. But like if you are really good at learning and really good at solving complex problems, like you're always going to have a marketable skill, whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
So who knows what your business evolves into? Who knows what the world evolves into? But if you can develop this deep work skill, I think you're always going to be in a good spot to
Mhm.
respond thoughtfully to the world as it
Totally.
is.
Yeah. You become indispensable, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And like I think
Yeah.
another Cal Newport, but Cal Newport should be here. I should have just invited him to come talk to us today.
Well, yeah, we should.
But it's like I think it's something like so good they can't deny you or something like that. So good you can't. There's another book that he has which is basically making this argument like, and it's a quote from Steve Martin, but it's like, be so good that you're undeniable. Like, be
Yeah.
undeniable. Really hone a skill so clearly that like you are just known for this, like in your city, in your
Right.
state,
Yeah.
in your area of expertise. Like if you're like a perinatal therapist, like take the time to take yourself seriously and be like an incredible perinatal therapist, that a bunch of other therapists look up to. Right. And so like we
Yeah.
all have that opportunity. But I think that's another piece. And as we're talking, I'm just thinking now, David, about how like as I'm, kind of moving into the Cal Newport world, it's a lot of men. A lot of men are in that space,
Mm,
right? And I
interesting. Yeah.
think that I don't think I know that men are socialized to take their gifts more seriously and to believe that they do have gifts to share with the world. And something that I see with the
Mm,
folks that I support, like with women and marginalized folks and queer folks, is
yeah.
they're generally
Yeah.
socialized to believe that they don't have gifts, right? And that they don't have something special to offer the world. And like what I want to say to folks who are listening is like, as David was saying, like it is countercultural to do these things, but it's also especially countercultural for women and marginalized folks to do these things, to like take yourself seriously and take your gifts seriously and build a schedule that actually allows you to hone your gifts and like where you're really owning your learning and your gifts. That is like kind of not what you're supposed to be doing in these marginalized positions. But I have to
Yeah.
say, like most of the therapists that I meet are brilliant. They're brilliant people, but they don't recognize that gift in themselves. Do you notice that working with therapists, like them not recognizing the value of what they offer?
Sometimes, but I think like it's definitely out there, and like I
Yeah.
suffer from that too
Yeah.
sometimes, as well. I think, yeah, a lot of folks do, and I think it's as you said that I was like, oh yeah, like that's so important. And what like jumps out to me is just like build your community, like get
Mm.
people around you to remind
Yes.
you of this fact, because
Yes.
I struggle with it too. And sometimes I'm just like, oh God, like I'm a cis white male. Like I should
Mm.
be like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
should, like, I should have
Yeah.
this down pat. And like, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, like there's a lot of privilege behind that. Like I am gay as well. So like there is that factor. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, yeah, like it's just when you said that, I'm like, gosh, for so long, like,
Mhm.
like where did that come from? You know, like it's
Mhm.
just like, why do I think that way? And I've
Yeah.
done a lot of work recently to like really shift that narrative, but like community and having
Yeah.
people to
Yes.
talk to has been so important in that. And a therapist too, by the way, a
Yes.
therapist, but also a community. Yeah.
Also, we love therapists. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Obviously.
agree. Like, I think for myself, like, I have built a network of friends who are all across North America. Like, nobody's even in my province or my country.
Wow.
But I
Yeah.
have found that,
Yeah.
like, network of folks who are all women who do recognize my brilliance. I recognize theirs. We like lift each other up. We encourage each other. Like we just kind of reflect back the best in each other and challenge each other. And I think that is essential, is to have folks who are going to support you to be your best self, right?
Yeah.
Not folks who might be unconsciously wanting you to just like be a helper to them or stay small for whatever relational reason you might have between you. So
Yeah.
yeah, really, yeah, that's a very, very powerful point as well. So David, thank you for coming and
Yeah.
talking.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for nerding out about Cal Newport and deep work with me. For folks who are listening, who want to get further into your world, where can they find you and follow you?
Yeah, the best place is probably to visit my website, which is turningpointhq.com. So HQ like the abbreviation for headquarters, turningpointhq.com. I'm also, one of my deep work goals for this year is getting more into social media, which also sounds a little counterintuitive, but social
Yeah.
media is not something that I am very familiar with. So I'm on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my big space. So you can find me there under David W. Frank if you want. But there's links to all that on my website as well.
Yes. And I think, just to be fair, social media can be deep work when you're really like getting into that creation and strategy piece of
Yeah.
it. It's just the checking of it that can be distracting, but you can batch that.
Yeah.
You got
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Batch it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so fun.
I feel like my conversation with David could have been twice as long. And after we stopped recording, we continued to talk for a little while about some of the ideas about learning and how much learning we're capable of. There's just a lot to talk about when we start to dig into creating space in your life to do work that is meaningful and satisfying and makes a big difference. So I really appreciate David coming on the podcast today to dig into something that I've been very, very passionate about, that I've seen make a huge difference in my own business. And if you're curious about deep work, these are not our ideas. We're talking about Cal Newport's ideas. You can check him out. As David mentioned, he is a computers professor, a world that I know nothing about, who's written Deep Work and Digital Minimalism and several other books that basically all make arguments around how we use our time and how we use our minds is important. And when we're intentional about how we use our time and our minds, we can do really meaningful, satisfying work and make a big difference in our fields. And everybody listening, you are an expert in your own focus area of your practice, if your niche. You've got your modality, you've got your lived experiences, you've got your skills that you've built. And I would really encourage you to think about how you could build more time into your week to really take your own learning and growth seriously. And that deeper tasks, those things that take focus, give yourself that gift of focus to work on your business and let yourself learn and be really great at the things that you love and that you're already really great at. You can follow me on Instagram at Money, Nuts, and Bolts. And as always, I do really appreciate your reviews on Apple Podcasts. So if you're enjoying the podcast, if you could jump over to Apple Podcast and leave me a review, sharing your favorite episode, what you enjoy about the podcast, the impact that it's had for you. It is the best way for other therapists and health practitioners to find us and be part of these conversations. Thanks for listening today.